Oh, welcome back. It's been a long time since I had an update on this project of mine. This is the turbocharged Lincoln LS. Since I last did a video, kind of got a couple things accomplished. I had a lot of things go wrong. Got some things corrected. Kind of a couple of changes I made to the turbos themselves. The actuators for the turbochargers were these guys here. I don't know what they're set to, but I think it was at least 1.5 bar pressure to actuate these. So I did some things to them to try to lower that cracking pressure for the wastegates. I put a couple of die springs in there and compressed those. I was able to get it to drop down quite a bit, but I was not down to where I wanted to be. So I ended up buying some new actuators from eBay. One from like a TRITDT, and the other one was from another Japanese company. They're the same device, just two different tags on them, and those you can change the springs out. So right now I have their weakest spring they ship with, which is a half of a bar spring, and I have it set, a few turns in. So when I was doing my test drives, it would open up at about like 4.5 psi. That's pretty good for where I want to be testing this while I'm driving around. And one day I was out for a test drive and was driving around and kind of pushed it a little bit too much, and I got to 10 psi boost, and I heard a little pop, and then the car went to limp along more, and then I got it back in the garage, and of course on the way in the town started to overheat at the same time. So I got in the garage and tried to find out what happened. So I guess the mosquitoes are pretty bad today. So I opened the hood, and right away the pressure got so great right here in the throttle body connection, just popped it off. So the mass airflow sensor was just not hooked up to the engine anymore. So that was the reason for limp along more. And the overheating was just this simple. Every time I go to program the car with the STT tuner, it always turns the fan on full blast, and just to kind of save battery while it's doing it, I've been unplugging the fan. I just forgot to plug it back in, and but right now I have it unplugged as well. I'm gonna get that back in before I forget about it. So once I figured that out, it was good to go. And of course, a few days later, ever since I bought this car, I've always smelled antifreeze, kind of. And back over here in the corner, there's the reservoir, and sure enough, one day there was a big puddle of antifreeze on the floor, and pull the reservoir out, and there's a big crack in the side. So I got a new one of those. And of course, to actually hook up the return hose on the bottom, you have to pull the brake booster out, which is the third or fourth time I had it out while I was chasing down these I guess advanced track issues I've been having with the calibration of the sensor in there, booster gauge sensor or pressure sensor. Never can get that to calibrate with the 4Scan software. So I got that back in there, and then that started leaking. And so I had to get one of those from junkyard, because you can't buy those anymore. At the same time, I noticed that my tires in the back kept going flat, so hence the new wheels on the Lincoln LS. The other ones were, the chrome was so corroded on the inside that there was no longer the ability to maintain a bead seal. There's a step between the corroded missing chrome and the chrome that was there. Like whoever had this before basically drove it through a salt bath and then parked it for a month, which was not the best thing to do. So as I had the brake booster out and I had the tires off it, and the bleed, I said, well, maybe I'll just change the brake pads. And one other thing they had is, because of the turbos being underneath, all the tubing is very low underneath the car, and driving around, and of course it would bottom out and things, and I'd look at the car and it's like, man, this thing's not sitting very level. And so it's like, as long as I got the wheels out, I'm going to take the shocks and springs out of the front and And sure enough, once you get those out, you find the the springs are broken on both sides, and you think you could find a new spring somewhere. Nope, not anybody makes these. I'd have to get them custom made, but you go to a junkyard and they're all broke the same way. Here's one, here's the other. It seems like they get corroded, or that contact point there when they bounce causes them to get a little damage in the surface, which propagates through and maybe fatigue cracks them or whatever. And so what I did was try and get some more clearance underneath the car. Let me get the flashlight back here. But as long as to kind of compensate that broken spring, so I reused the spring. But what I did was, you can just kind of see it if I get in there, I made some spacers to basically lift the front end of the car up, so instead of going to the car part store and getting those twist in spacers you put in the springs or the clamp ones or whatever, I just went to the recycling facility and grabbed some stainless steel tubes and plate, and made my own spacers. So I was actually quite happy with the results. The car looks pretty level, side to side, front to back, and more importantly, got a much better ground clearance to my turbo setup. And so with that, of course, mosquitoes again. After all this time of messing around and waiting for parts and getting anything set and ready, I can go to finally, I'm going to install my own tune, with my Pro Racer software, kind of go through and data log. Right now I was just working on like the closed loop portion of tuning, so my first step was just to kind of run it around and give it some gas, kind of run it up and down under some load, and then take the long-term fuel trims from the data logging software, compare that with the mass airflow rates and look at the air fuel ratio, which I had to put a gauge in for. That's my gauge set now. It's not the best location, but there's intake and outlet temperature for the intercooler. There's the boost, which usually when I was testing out was hovering right around 4.5, 5. I'm not sure what this 0 point is. The gauge looks like it's a little bit low. Now I got the wideband air fuel ratio sensor. And so what I noticed driving around, like if you step on the gas from a low RPM case where you're basically accelerating from the stop, the computer actually does a good job of holding it in this stoichiometric range of 14.5, 14.7. The gauge isn't that great for accuracy, I don't believe, but it's there. But what I did notice, that if you're kind of cruising and then you step on it, and it's kind of maybe a gear higher than it should be, and it kind of dogs out, then the air fuel ratio goes way lean in that case. So it's like I'm not really sure what's driving that. But my first step was to collect this data, and I was able to show a trend that when the air fuel ratio is going lean, and I'm getting the same numbers in the field, in the long-term fuel trims, like it's trying to compensate. So in the end, my first tune was just first step was just to retard the spark, I think 4 or 5 degrees, just for safety. And then the second one was to look at the transfer function for the mass airflow sensor, and basically bumped it up. So I found, like, for 0 to 4,000 or 400 or 500 counts, mass airflow counts, it was off by 10%. That's like the computer's trying to make up 10%, and then when it got higher than that, it was actually jumping up to near 15.